guys, so I did my decade on the 1960s, which was a decade full of fun but also depressing events. To start it off, I'll start with world events, such as the Cold War, which was a war between the US and Russia, where the US had nuclear weapons pointed at Russia, and also Russia had their nuclear weapons pointed at us. We were both literally within seconds of destroying each other's nations. This then led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the US had our missiles stationed in Europe, and then when the Soviet Union tried to put their missiles into Cuba, pointed at us, we completely had to stop this. Civil rights movement of America was also a big movement, which you guys obviously know what that is, and Martin Luther King. This is when Martin Luther King gave some of his famous speeches, and he was also assassinated later in 1968. Moving on to American events, in 1960 was the first televised presidential election between Nixon and JFK. And then in 1960 also was the American spy plane U-2, which was shot down by Russia. In 1963, JFK was assassinated on November 22nd by Lee Harvey Oswald. This was an event that completely shocked America. No one was expecting that at all. 1964 was the Civil Rights Movement bill was passed to stop racial discrimination, and in 1968 was when Martin Luther King was actually assassinated. In 1969, this brought happiness and more good times to America with Woodstock. Woodstock was a hippie festival, I guess if you want to say, which was held in New York City, and more than 500,000 people attended it. Moving on to social issues was LSD and marijuana. These were both big problems and were popular trends to do in the 1960s. Most of the marijuana was started by the hippies, and it was founded earlier in the decade, but it was more popular during the 1960s. James Brown was a soul artist who spoke out through his music, and a lot of people loved the way he communicated, I guess, with other people and the way that he showed his music. Also, tie-dye, which was started in 1960. So the two films that I decided to watch were Goldfinger and From Russia with Love. They were both written by Ian Fleming, and From Russia with Love was directed by Terrence Young, and Guy Hamilton directed Goldfinger. So basically, starting off with Goldfinger, it was about wealth and money, and also gold. Goldfinger was a guy who came from Europe and decided that he wanted to rob Fort Knox and completely take over the area. And it was Sean Connery playing James Bond's responsibility as a secret spy agent from Britain to stop this from happening. Like all Bond movies, Bond was named 007, and he was armed with special gadgets like his Aston Martin and smoke screen and ejector seat. I noticed in Goldfinger that it had a lot more thriller scenes and action scenes versus From Russia with Love, which was brought out 2 years earlier in 1962, and Goldfinger, which was brought out in 1964. From Russia with Love. So basically, it was about the Cold War. That's what it represented. It represented the Cold War, and it was a lot more calm. And there was a decoding machine that was going to explode in the U.S., where it was Bond's responsibility to decode that machine and stop this from happening. From Russia with Love was nominated for a Golden Globe, but it also won 4 other awards from the Film Academy. From Russia with Love was packed with action and thriller scenes. I think that they really wanted to start off the trend, which I think they did, but it didn't really have as much fighting scenes as Goldfinger, so they just started it. And I think that the best fighting scene was in From Russia with Love, which was towards the end of the movie. So basically, I decided to nominate From Russia with Love because it really represented the decade well, because one of the most important events was the Cold War, and how From Russia with Love represented this was because It was calm, but it also had spying agents from like all over the countries coming into different countries and invading areas. But also had spying agents that were secret and nobody knew about, which was happening in the U.S. and in Russia, where we both had spies in each other's countries. So that is why I decided to nominate From Russia with Love.
In a young girl's heart, how the music can free.